What's that art behind you? I like that.
Yeah, it's actually a piece my dad painted.
That's sick, dude. That's awesome. I was just thinking about, I couldn't remember if both of your parents were visual artists or if it was just one. I like that piece a lot.
Thank you. Yes. I had when I bought my condo that I'm in right now, I kind of commissioned my dad to do like a painting for us. And it was like the first piece of art that we kind of had in our new place. So it's really cool, special piece and very custom because he doesn't do a lot of stuff like this piece behind me. But yeah, both my parents are artists and my dad is incredible. He does like sculpture, mixed media, painting, digital art. He's done public art pieces, and then my mom is incredible as well. So really excited about it.
Yeah, it looks so cool, man, and it's awesome. He's still doing it too. I don't know. I was just thinking about we don't have to like jump into some weird, super deep thing off the top, but I was just thinking about like aging in art in general. Because I was listening to, I know you're a big comedy guy too, and I listened to a ton of comedy podcasts, and something you hear over and over is like comedians don't even consider someone to be possibly good until they're like 10 to 15 years in,
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like for what we do, it's almost like if you're 10 to 15 years in, there's almost a stigma against it,
Right. Yeah. Like you're like that old creepy person that's still playing shows and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think it's also, that is a really interesting topic because are we technically started yet or?
Yeah. I mean, we started rolling when you hopped on, but we can edit.
Okay.
We can
I
edit
just want to make sure we
anything.
didn't need to do like an intro or something, but like I'm down to just roll right into it.
Yeah. No, I'll do the intro later. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I feel like what's really interesting about that is like, it's all about perspective in a sense. I think like when you're talking about comedy, someone who became so much more respected as they got older, even though they were doing the same thing when they were younger, was like George Carlin, right?
Yeah.
Like he really got his flowers and then he almost was gone too soon, right? In music though, like you touched on, there is kind of this weird stigma of like, dude, why are you trying to be a rock star at 40? Or why are you this? Or why are you trying to, DJ at this? But it's also kind of like, how do you carry yourself? How are you as a person? Because I think that not everyone can do that, but I think that there's certain people that are able to kind of transcend their age, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Like people are still rocking out to Rolling Stones concerts, right? I mean, I would say probably the average age of someone going to a Rolling Stones concert, and I'm a huge Rolling Stones fan, but like, is probably older, right? They're probably from their era.
Yeah.
But, that's a band along with many other bands that have been able to maintain a fan base and I think are still looked at as cool, like, and they're old,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's interesting, man. Because I mean, at least with them, I guess there's two ways to do it, right? Because with them, they never really changed what they were doing. Like they've been not that their sound hasn't changed or that they haven't experimented, but like they've just done the Rolling Stones the whole way through. You know what I mean? Whereas, in our world, I mean, you look at somebody like Diplo or Skrillex or whatever, and there's all these phases and different things they're trying, and it's like each time they come out, it's like emerging from the cocoon kind of thing, And maybe it's for a rock band, maybe it's better or easier to kind of just like, stick to the thing you do and just do it to the death. I don't know. Like so much of what we do is like, for better or for worse, like a little disposable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, then that's the thing is it is very much like, I mean, my tastes have changed since I started, right? And I'm sure yours have. And, even in the music that I make now, like I can't, if people wanted me to make what I first started coming up in my career over and over and over and over again, I would have lost it and probably wouldn't be here talking with you right now, you know? Or maybe we'd be talking about my good old days career or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that it's like in this day and age too, everything is so like rapid fire, like, even when I go on Spotify, like I listen to literally everything under the sun. I mean, I have Stones on my liked Spotify. I've got, death metal and Children of Bodom, which is a Finnish, melodic death
you don't
metal
have to
band.
tell me, yeah.
And then I've got hip hop, old school hip hop, new, electronic, folk, and I'll put it on shuffle, and it'll just be like the most random stuff. And so for me, even with my musical taste, I feel like I'm always inspired to kind of keep reinventing myself. And I think that there's very few artists that are, and I think we see a lot of times like artists throughout history, whether it's rock and roll or folk or any of those genres I spoke about, that, you're always like, oh, that one hit wonder or that thing. And they weren't able to move past what maybe people knew of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's almost like a gift and a curse. Like if you're so well known for one thing, like I think that the Stones music was music that was, it transcended their generation. It's music that still is just as relevant today and works today. But a lot of bands can't do that, Like, I don't know if people are going to be playing Bap U in 40 years, you know what I mean? But I hope that'd be awesome. But, it was a product of the time, and it still is one of my top songs on and most requested and on Spotify and stuff. But
do you still play it at shows a lot?
It's funny, for many years. There was a good like year and a half, 2-year period where I kind of stopped playing it, and I've started bringing it back again. Especially like if fans in the audience are requesting it, I kind of do it as like an encore sometimes.
Yeah,
but that's kind of it's become one of my evergreen songs, And I think that I think for a while I fought kind of being like, oh, I want to move on, but it's kind of like that was also the song that kind of really kick-started everything for me. So it's like, it's kind of cool to bring it back again,
Yeah, man. That song, I mean, there is something about that song that I think carries through, like just the aesthetic and the little choices you made in that song. I feel like I can hear that same person, like even in the new album a little bit. Like there is, I remember this rant. This probably won't even translate as a story on this podcast, but there was a moment a long time ago, I think right when you put out Bap U, and I was touring with Buku at the time, and
yes,
we were listening to that song, and this is like a very minor thing, but my brain kept catching on the melody of that main line where it's like,
I know what you're going to say, I think.
Yeah, where it's like, da, 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 da. And like when it hits that high note again, you expect it to stay in like a minor key, but it goes to like the half step up, like the major key. And for me, I was like, man, why did he do that? That's a weird note to be playing. And Rob Buku was like, no, man, that's why this is a great song, is just because like that's like why it's weird and unique and fun. And we were breaking it down on that nerd level. But I feel like it's just those little choices and those like simple choices that I really like about your music, man. I hear it a lot on the Reset album. Like there's still those just fun little melody lines, those kind of earworm lines, even in like a much more complex, like nuanced album like Reset.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that. Is like, touching back on Bap U for a second, is like when I made that melody, I actually did do it where I was kind of like, okay, that note sounds like it's not supposed to be there. And I put it back the other way, and I had it for a while. And I was like, I don't like that anymore. And what's funny is that even when I made that, I wasn't thinking of it in a musical theory standpoint. I was purely thinking about it of what sounds like, it just sounds right. It sounds cool. And I think that if I had of, maybe been more, I don't have any musical theory background. So if I had of maybe, at the time been so much more learned, in musical theory, I might have even been like, oh, that's blasphemous, or I shouldn't do that, or that's weird, or that shouldn't go that way. But what's funny is flash forward to when I was working on the Reset album, and I was working with a buddy of mine who is a classically trained musician. And he, went to school for music, and it's just a walking thesaurus when it comes to musical theory. And he heard that song, and he was, and we were working on some stuff, and I was trying some ideas out just kind of on the fly. You know how sometimes you just you're working with someone else and they try something, and then you're, doing whatever. And he's like, he's like, whoa, you're getting all jazzy on me. And I'm kind of like, am I? Like, I'm just being me, you know? And it's weird. It's like, you know, there's those step outs in jazz. There's no real, you know, uh, and so I think that maybe my brain, when it comes to music, is that there's a certain amount of freedom from not necessarily having that, like, I've been told you're not supposed to do this, even though you know, there are reasons for that, very much so.
Right.
But I think that, like, when I go to sit down to make music, I kind of just make what naturally gravitates to my ear, even if it maybe doesn't follow the typical structure.
Yeah, man. And I think, and I think you leaning into that and not that you haven't learned and become better and evolved and all that, but I think like leaning into those original tendencies, like that's, I don't know, for any of us, that's like the most pure form of who we are as creative people, right? It's like the person we used to be when we were just excited about all of this and didn't really know what we were doing yet. And, you know, that time is like such a, the longer I do this podcast, the more I talk to people, it's like, I feel like eventually everybody is just trying to figure out how to get back to that time.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously, if you go back far enough, it's like, I hope people don't ever hear that stuff because, you know, it's like,
well, I not like the stuff you were making specifically,
I was trying to find a project like a couple months back from literally 2014 or something. Cause I remember there was a really cool sound in there or something and it popped into my head. And I, you know, after a long time of trying to go back into my poorly named projects that I don't organize very well, I finally found it. I was like, oh my God. I listened to the song again. And I'm like, yo, the bass line's out of key. And I'm like, what was I doing? You know, like, you know, it's low subs or whatever, but it's still like, I hear that now and it made me almost like physically cringe. I was like, are you kidding me? Like I would have slapped myself silly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think touching on your point is like, I was talking about this with someone as well. I think that when you first start to make music and you don't necessarily have a career yet, there's a certain element of when you have that freedom, when you are starting out, that is literally the most free you can be as an artist. And I think that goes for really anything. I mean, I think whether it's physical art, like painting or, you know, acting or whatever, you know, there's no expectations on you. So you are free to not worry necessarily always about failing. And I think it's good to have that, but you are able to come out. Like when I started, I made the music I made because that's how I was able to teach myself to make music. And that's what came out naturally. And I was fortunate enough that it gravitated with people and I was able to make a career of it. But when I look back, I was making music for myself and I was making music the way that I knew how. And I think that as my career progressed, all the external pressures, you know, got to sell more tickets, got to, you know, better streaming records, got to, you know, get a higher billing at this festival, got to, you know, get a bigger fee, do this stuff, I all started to lose that magic and that, why I got into it for the first place. So it was really cool on this new album because the pandemic forced me into a new way of thinking. And then it kind of was almost like starting over again, kind of back where I was just kind of creating weird, you know, stuff that is me, is Dylan, you know, just, there's not necessarily even like honestly, it sounds bad. And I don't mean this in any bad way at all, but it's almost as like more for me than it is for my fans. And I think that that's where, when I started and even made Bap U, I didn't even have a huge following at the time, but I was starting to, you know, bubble up. And so I think that it just feels good again. You know, it just feels like I'm re-energized with my music again, which is I'm personally happy about.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I mean, I think this album, the Reset album, is definitely my favorite album of yours that I've heard up until this point. I think it's really good, man. I think you nailed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's cool because it does feel like an evolution, but like I said, I can still see like echoes of the very early sound of you, and you know all the shit in between. Yeah, I think it's really good, man. It's interesting. I mean, there's a lot we could talk about in this, but before I forget, let me say this: is that just on the note of like musical choices and not knowing what you're doing at a certain point. I was watching like an hour ago, I watched a little bit of when you were doing interviews with people. and I was watching you with Kashmir, the like podcast thing you were doing. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, the kind of isolated. Yeah,
Yeah, kind of isolated.
Yeah,
That's what it was called. Yeah. Your YouTube show that you were doing during the pandemic for a second. And so it's you interviewing Kashmir, and he was talking about kind of the same thing, that he worked with you kind of early on in your career. And that was one thing he was sort of jealous of, was that he felt like he was maybe shackled by too much knowledge, and that, you know, you would kind of go work in the studio with him and just make kind of weird instinctive choices that he actually felt like he couldn't make. I feel like more people should watch that, man. I liked watching you interviewing people.
Yeah, you know, one of the biggest things for me is like I get a lot of comments all the time about people being like, "Oh, you're so underrated," or this or that. And I don't say that as like I'm trying to pant my ego here. It's more like I've always been someone who I don't really like to I'm really bad at self promotion and self shilling of myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, touching on what you just said, like I really am proud of that series. And I think for me, it was a really good way for me. I've always been kind of someone, when it comes to my career, when I'm on stage and I am in party favor mode, I am the performer. I am party favor. I am giving myself and, you know, my art or whatever. And then whenever I get off stage, I'm kind of like, I'm back to Dylan.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't want to be in a bar. I don't want to be in a club. I want to be just chilling at home or exercising or enjoying the outdoors or whatever. And so I think that I've kind of sometimes retreated too much into that side and kind of forget that, like, at the end of the day, people want to see who, you know, I am. And it was really fun to, you know, to actually be kind of on your side of the interview, right? Where I got to kind of cater to that and kind of, you know, showcase, you know, who I am and how I would lead an interview. And so it was really fun for me. And I hope that, you know, anybody that's listening or watching this, you know, feel free to check them out. It's called Kind of Isolated. I think there's only 4 or 5 episodes, right? And the goal was to do more, but it was kind of something we started during the pandemic. And I would always love to continue that series, or, you know, whatever comes next.
You should, man. I mean, it's a ton of work, as I'm sure you know. But,
yes.
but yeah, it's I like seeing you do it, man. It was cool. There's been a few like DJ podcast kind of things. Again, taking it back to the comedian thing. Like, the reason I started doing this in the first place was because I listened to so many comedy podcasts and kind of just wondered why it wasn't happening here. And now it's, you know, I've been doing this for a while, but now there are a few other like DJ podcasts and people making this kind of content. I don't know, man. It's nice to see. I feel like for a while, maybe this is the disposable thing, but yeah, I feel like we've all known, like, people in the community have known that, like, there's a lot of interesting stories and people and crazy people and just, you know, just wild stuff that maybe your average listener wouldn't know about. And it's fun to talk about, man. I don't know. For me, it's almost more fun to talk about than the public facing stuff. Like, I love being on stage. That's my favorite thing ever. But I'm kind of like you, like, after I'm off stage, unless it's something in a format like this, like, yeah, I'm not trying to, you know, just go party or something.
I think there's something about like the podcast format that just feels, I think it's able to break people's kind of guards that they have up.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that even when you do an interview at a festival or with a magazine, sometimes it can just feel very impersonal, right? Because a lot of stuff nowadays, especially, is done, you know, if you get an interview request, it's sometimes it's a Zoom like this or whatever, but a lot of times it's just like hey, here's some interview questions, type out your responses. And that's great. I'm happy that people want to interview me, you know, but at the same time,
you just talk to somebody long enough, and I think the personalities just naturally come out. And it's a very different experience than like consuming their art or seeing them perform, because it's, you know, it just breaks it down. I don't know. People know what podcasts are. I don't know that I have to advertise podcasts.
What's a podcast?
Yeah. You'd be surprised. I had to explain, when I started doing this, I had to explain what a podcast is to a lot of DJs.
Well, I feel like even since we did the first one, what is this 4 now we've done?
Yeah, you're the all-time champ, man. I don't know why it's you, but I'm happy it's you. But I think you're more than anybody else.
I don't know why it's you. Unfortunately, it's you. But
no, it's great. I love it. It's I think 4 now.
Well, hey, you know what? I will take and hold my title as proudly as I can until someone overtakes it, and then I'll have to get right back on.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't let this title. I'm gonna be the all-time champ.
I'm
gonna be the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar of back-to-back podcasts.
Absolutely. But yeah, man, I mean, to go back to what we were saying about, the Reset album and it sort of actually being a reset. I was reading, coming to talk to you, I was reading like the Reddit AMA you did and a few other recent things. And you were talking in there a little bit about how, even before the pandemic, you were kind of getting a little mentally burnt out and maybe just in the rat race of all of that. And I wanted to just ask you like more specifically, because I think anybody who does this long enough, we can all relate to the idea of like being burnt out and just being stretched thin and all that. But for you, I mean, what form was it taking? Like what were you feeling at the time? What was sort of causing it looking back? Do you even know?
Yeah, I think, I guess in a way to like psychoanalyze myself, which I'm definitely not a trained professional here. So,
me neither.
I'm putting a disclaimer out there for anyone listening. It's funny. I've been so fortunate, and because I'm prefacing this by saying this, I've been so fortunate to get and achieve everything that I had originally set as goals for myself when I, to where I'm at now. And I'm someone who I've been this way my whole life, but I'm never happy with one accomplishment. Once I achieve something, I want the next thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because I'm not guilty, but I think I want to keep pushing myself to become better and better. And I feel like I started to find myself saying like, wow, I got everything I wanted. I've got food on the table. I've got savings in the bank. I'm playing music. I've got fans across the country, around the world, but I'm not happy,
Yeah.
And I think that being happy is kind of it's a broad term, right? It means something different to everybody. And I realized that even though I was doing these fun things, I was like, okay, clearly all the accolades, all the whatever in the world. And it's funny because I'm not the first person to ever say any of these things, but it really does show that it rings true for a lot of people that everyone's happiness level is measured by different things. And so for me, I was realizing that, wow, why am I waking up and just feeling so like there's a fog, and my whole life, I've always been literally the most outgoing, definitely an extrovert, happy, to the point where I sometimes annoy my friends that aren't that way,
Yeah.
And I started finding myself like kind of in a fog and in this thing where I'm like, look, who am I making music for anymore? What is this doing? I'm like, I'm part of this machine that is party favor that is becoming bigger than myself. And I don't feel fulfilled, and it's so hard because I'm sure to listen to that, it's like, wow, you're ungrateful or this or that. It's like, no, like I'm so grateful. I'm so appreciative.
Yeah, you can be both, man. You can be both. I mean, I think it's a lesson as old as time itself that like, careful what you wish for kind of thing. You know what I mean? And that I think it's not even just in music. I think it's in anything. If, somebody sets out these giant goals, works super hard to achieve them, and then you get there and realize that like, that's not actually what makes people happy. I think that's kind of a universal law.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I've always kind of like, at one point I started to be like, I'm making music, but I'm like, I was torn because I was like, I'm going down a path that's heading towards maybe I could have more success, maybe more, straight pop records or straight this and that. And, make it to the mountaintop. Right.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm not fulfilled. And maybe it's part of, growing up with parents that were artists and that's what they did for a living, that they stuck true to what they did and what they made. And I think that there was something where I was like, I'm starting to kind of become the person or like that that's just not who I am as an artist or whatever,
Yeah.
And I think that it manifested to me where I started noticing that, I started becoming more anxious. I started becoming, overthinking things, thinking the worst, finding myself, just feeling down, I don't know. I just kind of felt like there was about a year and a half, maybe 2 year period where I was like almost in a fog.
Yeah.
And I don't really have and it was actually during a large part of it was even during the making of my last album, Layers. And when I look back onto that, it's really funny because when I listen to Reset, I'm like, wow, here I'm telling a story. It sounds fresh. It sounds different than other stuff. And when I listen to Layers, I'm so proud of a lot of that stuff, but I can tell I was trying to throw, I think we might have talked about this the last time I was on your podcast, but I was trying to throw whatever I could at the wall.
Yep.
Try to keep it clean,
throwing
a cock at the wall and see if it's stuck.
We can swear, man. It's all good.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just trying to get better. I have a really foul mouth, so I'm like trying to get better
too.
about
the podcast trained me too, man, to be a little better with that for sure.
But I'm kind of rambling, but I guess, I just think that I benefited from a reset, pun intended, of my whole system and mind, and I don't think that I still feel a lot of those things. And those are things that I'm now going to be battling for a while now. And I think that one of the biggest things people don't realize, like when you're on the road, is that, we as humans attach a lot of our identity and our happiness to things that we are familiar with, family, routine, not everybody, of course, but, and I've noticed that I think that in our world, you're always it's somewhere new. You're always meeting strangers. You're always meeting new people. You're never really at home. And I think that, I would come home, I feel at home, but I never feel home. Does that make sense? And I think that was a big thing for me too, is just that coupled with the music, coupled with everything else. And it was definitely a dark period in my life, but I definitely feel like I've kind of, at least as of right now, come up much more on the top side of that.
No, that's good to hear, man. It's interesting too, because I think the darkness that we're talking about, you can, of course, hear it on the album. Like, it's a very dark feeling album, which is cool because that's another side of you that I hadn't heard like fully realized, was like, what does dark Party Favor sound like, Because it does still sound like you and still sound like Party Favor, but it to me felt like just a different side of it.
It's funny. Sometimes I wish I could just change my name to Dylan, as an artist name, because it's like, I want people to think, I think, you hear the name Party Favor and you automatically think something, and it's like, and if you know me from before,
right.
My music, when I started, I was young, I was, out of college and trying and working, and what came naturally is I just wanted to make music that you didn't have to think too hard about. You could just listen to and have a good time, shake your butt if you wanted to, and that's great. And honestly, that music still is out there and it serves its purpose and it's great. And I love it. I still play it. But I started feeling like, and maybe one of those things, we were talking about earlier, just a second ago, is that I was feeling like, okay, I'm putting all this out here, but I'm not really putting myself into my music, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think this album is really the first time where I did that. And I wrote songs with the artist and lyrical themes and concepts, and it was coming from a dark place, but it's funny because the album as a whole is, yes, dark tonally, it's dark sounding, but I feel like there's an element, and I was hoping to, get this across, that there's almost like hope and light in the darkness. There's a lot of those light moments throughout the music.
It's not it's not a downer of an album at all.
Right.
It's almost like I don't know, more of like a
Sugar Rose or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just to stare at your shoes for an hour kind of album. No, not that at all. But yeah, I don't. Maybe I guess I don't know the best way to describe it, because I think you're right. It has all of that in it. Maybe it's just, I don't know. It's aggressive or moodier or something. But
yeah, I mean, I've always had a really hard time constraining myself into like a certain genre, a box, and in our world, as you I'm sure know, if you find a formula and it works and fans love it, you got to kind of keep going after it, because that's what people know you for. They want, touching back on Bap U, this seems to be the theme this whole podcast, but
it's the Bap U anniversary podcast.
Yeah. But that song, it's funny. Like, I could have made 50 Bap Us.
Yeah.
And, people would have eaten it up. But at a certain point, people would have been like, all right, I'm time to move on. And I would have been stuck kind of being, I was lost there forever.
Right.
Or maybe that's a self-construct. Maybe that's what I think. But I've always felt like I have more to say. And I think in a way, when I started out, my name, my identity, I kind of have changed. And I almost feel like I've outgrown that in one sense. But it's like I still feel like who I was then is still me, So it's not like I'm trying to get away from that. I'm not trying to say like, oh, that I'm erasing that from my catalog or something.
Of course,
like that.
Man. And I really do. I said this already, but I really do hear echoes of like the early stuff in the new album too. I mean, just little melody lines or little. I mean, I think I've told you this on a different podcast too, but I think one way your music has always really stood out to me is you're so good at making something simple interesting. It's like just a very simple idea, but we'll just keep talking about Bap U. It's that same melody line. It's just one small choice in a very simple thing that makes it unique and stand out. And there are a few songs that I was just listening back to the whole album, and there's a few songs in there that do that exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, and it's also music that I like too. I mean, and when I listen to rock and roll or metal music, it's a lot of power chords. It's a lot of the same riff.
Were you a new metal guy at all?
I was, yeah. And in a way, I still am. Not really like I used to be when I was like young, but I don't know. I've always gravitated towards those melody lines and those moments that, to me, I want to hear over and over and over and over again, and they don't bore me. I was like, if you can hear something and it is catchy to you over and over and over and over and over again, to me, I'm like, you've got it. I mean, in a way, you think about like what's on the radio, that's essentially what it is. This is a lot of the pop songs. I mean, if you listen to, this is super random, this popped into my head, but that song Talk Dirty to Me by Jason Derulo. Remember, it was like number one in the charts.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, I know that that's not for everybody and that's not what everyone's taste is, but when I listen to that stuff, I'm like, there's a reason why it works with so many people. And it's like, it's repetitive, it's catchy, it's easy to listen to. And I think that I love stuff that is almost like, I don't want to use the word tribal, but almost kind of like taps into our psyche as humans of just wanting to hear rhythm and energy like that. And I think that I'm always inspired by a lot of different cultures and sounds, but I've always gravitated towards riffs and songs that are like, man, you got that one line, like, let's rock it until, you just when it's almost too much, and then you can kind of switch it up a little bit, bring it back. But I don't know, maybe that's just something I've always gravitated towards. And every time I try to like complicate a song and add too much other stuff, I always notice I go back and I'm like, why did I overdo it? Why did I do that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Do you do a lot of editing when you're producing? Are you going in and like deleting and paring down? Like, what is your process? Do you end up like putting a bunch of shit into the DAW and then taking a bunch of shit out? Or do you kind of just land on an idea quickly and work around that idea?
Usually it comes from like, the quota in our world, the drop, right? Yeah. So usually like, I'll always work on kind of the drop first, or a sound that kind of can turn into that. And usually I'll focus on, the sound and then the drums and the groove and the rhythm that I want to convey. And a lot of times I will literally sit on a 4-bar loop of a drop for way too long. Yeah. And sometimes I have to force myself to be like, all right, let's move on. Let's keep moving the structure out, see how we come back and see if we like it. But that's usually my first thing, because I'm kind of like, okay, this is the most important moment. This is the biggest moment. This might be a repetitive moment. This might be something that carries the whole song. I've got to get this part right. And then usually from there, if I can get it going, and it usually has to be like, I know it's going to work if the melody and the drop starts to come together within like under an hour.
Yeah.
Because then I'm like, I got this. And usually a structure starts to flow and I'm like already making the next drop or build up or, whatever it might be. And I'm like, okay, this is working. It's whenever it's like 3-4 hours in and I'm still working on the same loop and tweaking the sound or doing this. And I go back and I'm always like, shoot. And then I stop or whatever. And I come back the next day and I'm like, why did I just waste 4 hours of my life on this absolute garbage? Who would ever listen to this? I hate you. You suck.
Yeah.
Throw your whole life away and you you know,
Isn't it funny?
So,
Isn't it funny though that never stops happening, no matter like how good you get or how much experience you have?
I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, that can't happen to like the biggest guys, you know,
It has to,
Calvin
though. I
Harris
don't
or
know.
like whatever. But I'm sure, as you know, like honestly though, and then from the stories I've heard of, not even from other DJs, but other musicians and musicians I look up to, autobiographies I've read of musicians, some of the biggest songs in the world all happened by accident
Oh yeah,
or a
yeah,
mistake, or they were supposed to do something else and they did it this way, or, you know, the tape got reversed and they liked the way that sounded and they flipped it up this way, or, you know,
yep.
and it's so interesting how that happens where it's almost like you have to lean into the mistakes and let kind of fate work its hands, you know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely. Yeah, well, it's like we're
You have to be
not.
open to that, I guess.
Yeah, you have to be open to it, and I think open to the idea that like ultimately we're not totally in control, right? Because it's
Yeah.
the more you try to control what the song is going to be, and the more you try to force it to do what you want, the worse
Yep.
it's going to get every time. But it's kind of a constant struggle, at least for me, because of course I want to do that every time. I know what I want it to sound like. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's just the frustrating process of slowly making it worse and worse until you give up control again.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's like the trusting your instincts, as cheesy as that sounds, because it's like you got here, or, you know, for anybody listening that's trying to make music, you know, maybe it hasn't happened yet, but, you know, for maybe you or me that have been fortunate enough to be able to make a career or have had success in music, you got here for a reason. And that in that instinct, and it's your instinct, you have to trust that. And I think that, you know, anybody that's trying to make music, focus and trust your instinct wherever. I always feel like wherever your music naturally goes, go after that, because
Yep.
that's where I feel like you're going to have a lot of success. And even when I was first starting and trying to make music, like I was like, I'm making progressive house, and then, you know, I'm going to make big room house, and I'm going to do that because it's what's popular and what it sounds cool and what I want to play and all this stuff. But every time I would sit down, something else would come out entirely. And it's like, I would try to make, I don't know, I listen back to some of that stuff and I'm like, this is the worst garbage I've ever heard. Like, this sounds terrible.
Yeah.
You know, and thank God I'm happy that I didn't go that route. But at the same time, it's like, I finally started to just listen to like, all right, when I sit down right now, I'm not making house music. And even though I love it and I was DJing at the time and all this stuff, what comes out is weird, booty, hip hop, electronic hybrid music. And, you know, so just run with it. And that's what happened at first.
Exactly, man. I mean, I'm sure you know this. I know this. I bet a lot of people listening to this know this too, that there's so much talent in dance music and electronic music, like more than ever now.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who are so proficient at making anything that's the only thing that makes people stand out anymore, is when I can tell who the person is behind it, you know, like the personality. Because you know as well as I do, there's so many talented people who are kind of just making shit that fits in, like really well-made stuff that just fits into whatever scene they're trying to work in, that, you know, maybe it'll get played by some DJs in a club or whatever, but it's never going to go anywhere. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's also an element of like, when something's already been done by someone in a way, you're always going to be kind of on that person or that sound's coattails.
Yep.
And I think that it doesn't necessarily mean you need to start making Lego beat boop music or whatever, you know, that hasn't even been invented yet. So someone go do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, yeah, I mean, you have to be, people, you know, like relate to music because of the feeling, but they also relate to the musician, and they relate to, what do I connect with this person, or what are they trying to say? Now, you can argue some of my music in the past is like, you know, like I said, even myself, like it was meant to be purely enjoyed as just something to escape. And there's music for that reason too, you know? But I think what I like to hear, what I always is like the biggest compliment to me is like when you said, okay, I listened to your album, it sounds so, you know, it's its own thing, but I still hear you in it. Right. Which is, makes me happy, because I'm like, as you should, it shouldn't sound like, well, this sounds like a completely different person, or like, I don't hear you anymore in it. And I think that you shouldn't fight that as someone who's trying to make music. And there's a lot of people out there that are so talented, and I think that they chase what is working for someone else, but it's like, it's working for that person. And if you try to be that person, you're never going to be happy. And I went through that, early on in my career too. So.
Yeah. And, it's easy for me to just shit on people, but, we all go through it at a certain point. And I'm certainly not saying that people should just abandon whatever they're doing and, go do something crazy. But yeah, it's just, you got to have that awareness of, well, am I actually representing myself in this music? Because being proficient is one thing, and it's absolutely a skill, and it's impressive to be good at making music. But, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily what makes people pay attention to your music.
And I think that sometimes people get mistaken that being X amount good at production automatically makes you a great producer or a great artist. But I think anybody can learn how to paint. Anybody can, I'm sure that someone could look at the painting behind me right now and look at it. My dad did, and it's like, oh, I could paint that.
Right.
Yeah, sure. You probably could. You could look at it. You could look at it and you could figure out how to paint it. But what is the meaning? What is the story behind it? How does it connect with the person? When I look at this painting, it connects with me. It means a lot to me. And just like anything, art's subjective. And I think that it's funny because there's a lot of times I'll hear new songs from producers and stuff, and I'm like, wow, technically this is so insane. Like, you walk circles around me and my 10 years of experience and production. I'm like, I don't know how you did that. It's so clean. Your mix is great. Everything you did here is super exciting or unique. But I'm like, to me, I don't hear anything in this that connects with me, and it's just noise, And I don't say that in a sense of like, I'm trying to be like a boomer. I mean, like, literally like, oh, there's no melody, or it's just, for a long time, I think we talked about this in the last one, there was kind of like I called it like the pots and pans trap, or like the, there's, and even, there's kind of a cookie cutter formula in house again now. And even in bass music. And there's a few guys that have come up that have been able to really re-energize the space. And I think it's because they're coming from what we were talking about earlier. They're coming and not listening to what anybody else did. And they're like, here, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it in our own way, but also with melody, with energy. And I think that coming back to me, that's always the most important thing, is just melody. It's like, even if you have the craziest sound design or whatever, like, what is it that's going to make me dance? If we're going to go from the top, someone like Skrillex, right? Like, it's easy to point and say, oh, he does this, and this. But if you really listen, he is introducing element and rhythm and melody to me, that's why his music has staying power.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I listen to music now that maybe is like, wow, technically that is so proficient. The sound design is insane. The drums are amazing. The mix is great. Wow, that, can go off for a drop or something like that. Cool. But to me, I'm like, what? It doesn't connect with me on like can I dance to this? Does it connect me? Whatever. And then for all intents and purposes, that music is probably not for me. Right. But like, that's where I come from in terms of, and I think that why there's a lot of artists out there that aren't necessarily making it to that next level is because it's kind of like,
I agree,
stuck in this like noise for noise. If that makes
noise
sense.
for noise, and not figuring out how to make it connect, like not figuring out how to explain to other people why what you're doing is cool, Because I think for me,
Eptic is amazing. He does a great job of.
Oh yeah,
his bass music is incredible, but he's always got a rhythm. The way he does his stuff. He's got almost kind of a hybrid, like trip hop, kind of like hip hop influence in there. And there's like his drums and his grooves are always really unique and different.
Yeah.
Like you said, sudden death. I think we got off a little bit on a tangent here, but I guess that's just where I come from. So whenever I make stuff, it's always melody first over heaviness.
Yeah. Well, and to maybe bring it back to you and to Reset and all that. I mean, you've said a few times, like what you're looking for is like more of an energy than anything else out of the music you like. And, we started off talking about how you're listening to all different kinds of stuff and you're attracted to all different kinds of music. And I was relating to what you were saying, because I've always been that way too. I listen to everything. And to me, it was always the reason I liked all these different sounds. It was always the same reason, because it was the energy I felt off of them regardless of what the genre was or what instrument was playing.
Yes.
And I think part of that is like DJ brain, like we kind of see those connections between stuff you wouldn't necessarily connect. But I think that's true, man. And I think like with the Reset album too, like there's an energy to it, a vibe that runs through you. There's a lot of different genres on there. You're trying out a bunch of stuff from like super weird underground sounds to, fairly poppy tunes, but I feel like the energy throughout it is kind of the connective tissue.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't a question, so you don't have to.
No. I mean, it's very nice of you to say. And I mean, that's what my ultimate goal always was. And, I think that it was kind of a reset for me, even just mentally, as well as, putting it out. And it's like, I don't plan to even release another album again, maybe even ever. But like, I think for me, it was just kind of like maybe never say never, I said that after the last one too, but I think this one was different circumstances a little bit. But for me, I think ultimately I was just trying to like let people kind of into, where my mind state was, but also, trying to showcase hopefully a maturation of, is that the right word? Maturation?
Yeah, maturation. For sure.
Myself as a musician and as a person and, everything in between. And I've gotten a couple chances recently to kind of play out the album, in a set and do it with the proper production and, where fans are there to see me and me alone and not a bottle service club or not anything else. And it was really, really, really neat because I've never really gotten a chance to do that before, even with my last album. And so I'm looking forward to, we're working kind of on this new show idea that we're going to tease out in a couple months. It's going to be like a kind of an invite only show that I'm going to show some people and kind of, we're creating these really neat visual pieces to go with each song and also the story of the set and, really curate something that I never had done before. So I'm excited about that and, just continuing to work on other music.
Yeah.
Keep challenging myself.
I mean, I know you're busy with a bunch of shit, man, but it's cool to hear like, since we are focusing mostly on the Party Favor thing and on the Reset album in this podcast, like I remember when you put out Layers and you were doing some sort of specialized like Layers shows around the country, like here and there with a bit, I think I didn't get to see one, but slightly bigger production and more like focused production, presentation, that kind of thing. I would love to see like a full on, that concept for this album. I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah. I mean, this was really, in a way, it was so much of a concept album to me, in through and through. And so when I did these shows a couple times, they were much smaller venues. They weren't quite the right production or size that I wanted to be able to do it, but it was a great tester and a great way to see what worked, what didn't work. And when you think of artists in the space that are doing so well at some of these shows, Porter Robinson, Madion, and these guys that are able to give you, take you and put you into a world that you weren't in before, Odessa, or I think that I've always been inspired by that, and I've never taken that leap as Party Favor. And I've kind of dabbled in it, like with the Layer stuff, and this is kind of the first time, at least if it all goes well, will be really my legit foray into kind of giving everyone a proper show that I've always wanted to do. And that's everything from like, I'm there physically designing, the lighting with the production team and every single visual that goes into it and the timing and the moments and the, when the moments drop out, when they come back in, the visuals themselves, but I'm keeping the production in a way more simple, but I'm trying to create those moments as something that like people go, I don't want someone to just come to a show and be like, damn, that was a fun show. What a great time. All right, on to the next one. I want them to walk away and be like, because I've had those where I've had a show where I've been like, that stays with me forever. I want to be that show in someone's life,
Yeah.
So
that's a good goal, man. And I think that's one of those things you can work on for years and years. It's like, it's always a process. Not to mention, I mean, we mentioned like you also have a bunch of other projects you're doing at the same time. Like to me, it's actually kind of wild that, you put out this whole album while like, it seems like SIDEPIECE is super, super busy right now.
Yes, we are. I fly to Europe tomorrow for Tomorrowland for that. And that's definitely been a super trip to kind of have those going at the same, both going at the same time, where it's almost kind of like my mind has got to be like 1 week I'm on Party Favor, 1 week I'm on this. And, right now, like definitely my focus is in a way on Side Piece, because it's really pumping. We're having a great time. It's fresh, it's new. And I think that, we're onto something. But it's what I think has been really cool is that it's given me the freedom to kind of, in a way, step away from Party Favor and then come back to it with a fresh perspective, and kind of makes me appreciate and get excited about it even more. And, even if I'm playing less shows right now as Party Favor, I'm excited because I think it's going to make me, when I come back to doing it more, if that does happen, it'll be much more impactful. And it's not going to be the same as it was. So I'm excited for that. And then, the other, there's always stuff that I'm working on, for other people or, other stuff.
Yeah. So. I mean, the other people stuff too. I mean, I don't actually know how much of that you do, but is that like a significant chunk of time for you?
I wouldn't say it's like significant. No. I mean, it's right now it's much, much smaller. But it's something that I'm now kind of, as kind of more of my shows are focused on the side piece stuff. And then I can kind of focus on curating these really cool singular shows for Party Favor. I hope that I have a little more time to kind of get into that world, because I'm really excited about kind of bringing my world to other people. And I've always one of my biggest goals from when I first started, I was like, I always thought it'd be really cool to score a movie one day, it doesn't have to be a blockbuster, but I want to get into that. And as I've learned more about musical theory and different things, and, there's moments on this album, I think you can hear that are very big and cinematic in scale. And, I've got a couple analog synths that I've just been loving. And
I was going to say, I had written down to ask you about analog, because I think that was another thing that tied a lot of the album together for me, was like the sonic palette of it, regardless of like what style the song was, or whether it was, deep or poppy or whatever. There's kind of, these similar sounds you're using. So was it, what analog gear? I mean, we can nerd out for a second.
This one, most of the album was used. I used a Juno, I used a couple different Prophets, but the main one that was used throughout the album that was on consistently on almost every record was the Prophet Rev 2, which is Dave Smith instruments. And the thing's incredible. And there's been some incredible patches made for it too, which is, side story. But I think that I really wanted to make sure that each song had element almost. I think I used a couple of the synths or bass pads that we made and kind of tweaked and stuff, essentially like throughout the whole album and almost every single song, so there's synths and sounds in there that are in every single song, which I thought was really cool. And a lot of that was really inspired by when, long before the album even started, I started working with a buddy of mine, Connor, who ended up working on quite a few records on the album, who is classically trained musician, and it was a great producer himself. And he really got me into a different way of thinking about producing. And, we started on working on some stuff for, some pop projects and different things like that. And when we were working together, I found that we really worked well together and our styles fit well. And he was able to kind of really teach me a lot about that world and help me start thinking of music and in the structure of my songs in a completely different way. And I think that it really, really reflects well on this album, because it feels like it's definitely a level up from where I had been previously.
Yeah, so. Absolutely, man. Yeah, the arrangements too. I mean, that's, to get even nerdier with it, like that's something I think your average listener maybe isn't paying attention to how a song is arranged, but that can affect the way a song is received so much. Like just little changes, making something 2 bars instead of 4 bars, making something repeat in an unexpected place. Those little choices. It's so funny. And this is like the unattainable question that I always circle around, is like, to do this well, it's like you have to be so detail oriented and so like, making these minuscule important choices, while at the same time being completely just free and open and like, whatever happens. It's like, it's such a weird duality.
I think that like one of the biggest things that I have learned over the years too is like, you have to also know when to stop.
Yeah.
Because any of these songs on Reset, I could still be working on them.
Oh,
I can
yeah.
work on them. I could work on them till the day I die in my studio chair.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you have to step back and say, it's okay. Let's let go. And there's sometimes where, as a producer or a musician, you're more confident than others. There's some times where I'm like, oh man, I could keep working. And some of these songs came down to the wire. Some of them were finished literally a year before the album came out, and it's funny how that works. But I also definitely recommend for anyone working on an album, if anyone's listening, finish the album first before you even start putting anything out. Because we started, and I say we, my team and management and label, everything, we started rolling the album out when I was only about halfway finished. And so as that starts to kind of progress,
that's
you're changing a lot of different things. Your taste is changing, your track list is changing, and there's a lot of stress that goes into that. And a couple months before my album came out, Flume's album came out, and I was briefly chatting with them and their team, and they're, he had already submitted the album months and months and months and months ago before, all together. And they picked out the singles and they did all that stuff there. But I kind of made the mistake of being like, all right, we're putting an album out. It's not finished yet, but I know it's going to be ready, And so I don't recommend that, because I think that it over the course of putting out the album, I tried out a lot of different things with singles and videos and different things to kind of see if I could connect with it with my fans, and didn't kind of stop and figure all that stuff out first before I put it out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, that's tough.
That's big knowledge right there. So if anyone, definitely listen to that, because you don't want to get stuck doing what I did.
Well, because it's ambitious, because I get the idea of like, well, if I put a deadline on it or I put some pressure on myself, then, I'll rise to meet that occasion, which is, that is true. That's like a useful exercise. But yeah, man, that's a good way to stress yourself the fuck out.
Yes. Yeah, there was some stressful months. I would say probably from like October of last year through January of this year was incredibly stressful, like super stressful. Cause that was kind of like, we got to get this in if we're trying to deliver it, cause a lot of people don't realize is like, they think, an album just, you're done with the album, you put it online. Like that's not how it works. There's so much that goes into it. There's so much, even that's outside of me or my team, like in terms of the labels, the way that they pitch things, the way that, they have to ingest into the whole system worldwide of distributors and all these things. And so it's like, you have to usually get, if I want my album to come out in June, like you want it in the hands of whoever in December. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was even running late at that point, to deliver my album in time. But once again, I'm super proud. I'm happy with how it turned out, and I'm excited for the future of Party Favorite music and, where it goes, and who knows where it'll go. So
yeah, man, I want to, when you do these shows for the album, I definitely want to try to.
Oh, you're going to come for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
The big one we're going to do, where we're going to tease it, is going to be in LA. So
nice.
Yeah, we're gonna hopefully do kind of like a raffle or something, for my fans to be able to come, because it's gonna be free. Like I want it to be something where people come and film it, see it, experience it, and really kind of be like, wow, I'm excited to look forward to this in my hometown or whatever it becomes from here. So
yeah, make a little calling card to show people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it, man. I mean, is there anything else like coming up for you? Anything else you're like, I know SIDEPIECE touring is going crazy. What are you doing now? Like, what are you excited on? What are you working on right now? Anything else we should get out there?
Well, obviously, if you're listening and you haven't heard my album, please give it a listen. And I'm sure there's something on there that you will hopefully like. There's kind of something for all walks of electronic life.
Yes. And by the way, not to cut you off, I did not mean that to be like, the album's done. Forget about that. What's next?
No, I know that. I was just saying, I'm guilty of that. I'm really bad about like, I put all this work. I care so much about a record. I put it out and immediately I'm like, I hate it. I'm on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And I think that this album, I'm really, I fought back against that, and I've really been proud of this album, and I'm excited for, it to kind of sit and marinate and hopefully continue to get listened to by people. And right now I have so many, other, works in progress, party favor stuff that either was an idea that just didn't quite make it in time for the album that I'm really happy or stoked about, or, singles. I have a few ideas for like possibly like an EP or something in the fall, but right now I've kind of like haven't really touched party favor music since I submitted the album, and it's been kind of nice to kind of take a break again on that. And, the summer is being dominated by SIDEPIECE shows, and we're working on music like nonstop with that too. We just signed with a big record label that we haven't announced yet, and we're really excited. So that's going to be big news. We've got a lot of amazing music coming out of that. And yeah, so it's just kind of like, having both those things chugging and you never know. I mean, once again, like I'm happy for this album. For me, I'm happy for my team and everyone that was a part of it, and so grateful for everyone. And just to get it out there, it's cool. It's what a cool thing it is we get to do to make music, and I just hope people enjoy it and can reach them. And sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but
no,
that's it. And then I'm sure, in the fall I'll be doing, who knows what this industry moves so fast. And, it's like I couldn't even begin to tell you or predict what's going to be happening in October of this year.
Yeah, dude. Amen. You know what's kind of cool though? I was realizing as you were talking about SIDEPIECE, to bring it back to something we were talking about at the start of this, is, we were talking about the artists who change and evolve, or artists who sort of stay the same, that kind of thing. And, working in house music, which is like such a timeless art form, I feel like that maybe that is kind of a cool duality for you too, where you can, with the party favor stuff, like really push it and try new ideas and experiment a little bit.
Exactly.
And then, the house music thing, like house music in many ways, like the formula has not changed since the inception of house music,
No.
Which is beautiful.
You're exactly right. And I think that I definitely felt that with this album. I felt a lot more freedom, which I think was kind of, like we talked about earlier, was a product of where I had been years before, but also, that freedom is definitely part of that is due to SIDEPIECE and having the freedom to say, okay, I don't have to necessarily rely on party favor shows as much for a living or whatever, and I can focus on this at the moment. But what's so funny, and I don't know if we touched on this. I feel like we might have, in one of the past.
Yeah.
Since I'm the all-time MVP
one of the past 90 podcasts we've done.
Yeah. When I started out making music, and I wasn't known for, as producing, and when I first started, I made the mistake of being like, at least, in my world, to focus completely on DJing and making it and climbing this path and climbing the club scene here in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And I did that in a way, but I was doing all that stuff, but I was opening for all my heroes and people I wanted to be like in the electronic world. But no one was coming to see me for my music or who I was. I was just another Hollywood opener. But what's really interesting is that the majority of those shows, even though I wasn't necessarily trying to make it, I was playing tech house and I was playing house music and, opening music that was traditional, they thought as more of an opening music for the bigger, higher energy stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about that is that I'd always loved house before that. But when I was doing that, it really started to give me an appreciation for it. And I loved it. And even though it wasn't necessarily what I was trying to make at the time, I think it's so serendipitous that I'm here now, all these years later, and now I'm doing that again. And I think that I like to think that I manifested that because I always thought I wanted to do something in the house world. And I always thought maybe I would just make another project. And I had actually tried a couple different times, started to come up with some names and I had made some records, and this was years and years ago. And I always thought it'd be really cool to kind of just go back to that. So in a way, it's kind of come full circle, and it's so neat that that's where it is, because I do truly, I didn't just hop on a fad, and Ricky, my partner as well, I don't want to leave him out. He's obviously incredibly talented musician, producer, great friend. He was kind of able to, he understood that as well. And I think that he kind of came from a similar situation as well. And so I think it's been great because we're both lovers of house first and foremost. And so, I'm so grateful that I never thought that it'd get this big, but I'm not complaining. but it's really cool to be like, yo, if I had told myself back in 2011, 2012, when I was playing these shows, 2010 even, like, dude, you're going to be playing this music in, primetime festival slots, but, with a new sound. And, I like to think that we're kind of putting our own spin on the genre, but it's awesome. I'm super pumped about it. It's definitely not something that I'm like, I have no problem if it totally eclipses Party Favor, because for me, I'm still feeling creatively fulfilled with it,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. That again, it goes back to energy. It's like whatever is feeling the best, it's like the same thing you were telling to aspiring producers. It's like, lean into what feels good, man. That's always going to take you to the right place.
Well, and I think that, touching on one of the themes we were talking about earlier is like, I think that we've been able to have success because we put our own spin and our own style on. And I think that when you listen to a side piece record, yes, it's in, I would consider it tech house. But I hope that it sounds unique enough that it's got its own flair. And I think that us both coming from, a more based background or whatever, and for so many years, not necessarily being in that world, we've been able to kind of approach it in a different way that I think feels fresh. And we, I wanted to flip it upside down. Cause I'm not Mark Knight, like right. He's one of my heroes. Like Mark Knight's Mark Knight, like he's going to crush it forever. I'm not, no one's Chris Lake, Chris Lake's Chris Lake, and Marco Lies and Mark and Martin Eichen and all these, amazing Green Velvet and, all these people that I am so excited to meet, in Europe later this week and stuff. And I'm like, I've been DJing your music since, 2009, 2008. And they're going to be like, oh, you're these new, guys. And it's like, I just feel like it's just cool that it's come back full circle, because I truly love the music and it's not just a fad for me. Like I still want to, even if tech house is not as popular in 2-3 years, like I still hopefully want to be continuing to play side piece shows. So
100%, man. Yeah. And have you, you just made me wonder, have you gotten any hate for like jumping into that scene? I feel like you guys are too likable to really get too much hate.
No, I don't know. I think both of us are kind of like, fuck anybody that feels that way, it's not, I don't necessarily care, but what I do is like, I would hate to like meet one of my idols and have them be like, snobby or whatever. But at the same time, like if they are that way, then they're probably not really meant to be my idols anyways. But I think for me, it's not necessarily hate, but I do know that in the house world, it's always kind of had a reputation of being a little more snobby and more kind of like, you got, just like we were talking about at the very beginning, like with comedians, like you got to grind for a long time. And I'm also someone who's like, I try to be respectful of that as well, because it's like, yes, we are new guys, but I've always felt like even sometimes when I open up for bigger acts, whether it's Party Favor or whatever, like I'll hit them up and be like, hey, like send me a do not playlist. And, like I want to make sure that you have the chance to perform how you would. And I'm going to be respectful of that I'm opening for you. And yes, there's like you can stand up and you got to show who you are, which is, I believe in myself that I can always do that,
Yeah.
But I definitely don't want to come in and feel like we jumped through any sort of hoops. And I think that's why when we started the project of Side Piece, we didn't announce that it was us. We wanted the music to speak for itself. I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm getting a handout because I'm Party Favor and this is Nitty or whatever. I wanted it to be like, hey, fuck with us because of our music. And if you don't, then you don't. And we won't make it. But like, for me, it's always been like the music's got to speak for itself. And I think it has so far. And I'm really excited because we have a lot of crazy stuff coming up that I think is going to continue to do well.
Man. Yeah. I'm stoked too, man. I feel like not even the last time, but I feel like whenever we did this, when we recorded the podcast at your place in LA,
yes,
you were playing me demos, like side piece demos even then. And I feel like some of those haven't even come out yet, or maybe they're just in a different form now. But
yeah,
I know both you guys.
That's right. I
do
remember that because that's right. You were telling me like, oh, this sounds really cool. I remember that now. I remember that exact moment. Yeah, some of those ones I don't know if we'll ever see. Some of the ones were like early ideas. Some of them became something else. As you know, that always happens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And as someone who's like I'm a fan of other musicians, other producers. And, I definitely myself have sometimes been like, oh man, I got to find that way to get the demo of this version or the, whatever happened to that version. Like, and there's a few records out there that are my grails that I'm like, I don't know how I can find them, but they don't exist anywhere right now. Except,
can you name one? I'm curious.
Top of my head.
If you can't, don't worry about it, because I hate off the top of the head questions. But
it's so weird. I know on one of these, I think it was like one of the first ever I did with you or whatever. I remember specifically for some reason we were talking about Boaz Van de Beats.
Oh yeah,
and his like his crazy way of like he came in and started producing and kind of introduced this whole new sound that came through bass and trap music for a long time.
Yep.
He has some demos out there that I remember hearing him play out at like one of his very few shows. I think like, some Mad Decent party way back in, 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if, Diplo or Jack U or something way back when we play him. But I remember some of those specifically being like, yo, this is the most insane like sound I've ever heard. And it might be probably the most annoying sound or it might be whatever. But I was like, I gotta have that because the energy was so unique and different.
Yeah.
Those are the first ones I can think of.
Yeah, no, that's a good one.
I'm sure I could put together a grail list, but there's a few from back in the day, man. Like all the Control Fridays up in Hollywood.
Yeah,
there used to be like everyone would come through and just flex. It made me think of like when I first started, and there was like Bloghouse was a big thing, and I'm sure people that have listened to this podcast for a while probably know what that is. Or that era was so unique because unlike now where there's Spotify and there's all this other stuff, like SoundCloud wasn't even, when I first started, SoundCloud wasn't even really a thing yet. It was like, it started to kind of trickle. It was really slow, but you would find all your electronic music on these music blogs. And even then you would still sometimes go to a show and that's where you would hear something. And sometimes that was the only time you ever heard it. And it reminds me of when like electronic music was in its infancy and, hearing, doing reading and research and looking back and watching old stuff, like DJs would hold on to those IDs and those A or B sides. And when they would play them, sometimes that they would carry that record with them.
Yeah.
And that was the only copy.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you could maybe print a new one and give it out to someone else. But like you came to see whoever it was, you were seeing them and you might not ever hear that record again because that's where you got to hear it. Dude. And I think nowadays it's almost kind of like everyone has this, I feel like we maybe talked about this, but everyone has the same edits, the same remixes, the same things. And it's like, it's cool. And you can like go to someone and be like, I want that because, that's how it should be. You should have records that your fans, like some fans still come up to me like, oh, what about this one song you played this thing? And I'm like, honestly, I made that song and I had no plans and still never have plans to put it out. It will never come out. Yep. So, and they're so angry and they want it. But I'm like, it's kind of cool. Like I'll play it sometimes. You can come hear it, but
yeah, dude, it's the best. That's the dub plate culture. Like, from like the old school sense of dub plate culture when, there would be like 4 or 5 copies of a record printed, just, given out to like one DJ and that DJ's friends. And that's it. It's a beautiful thing, man. And I think I'm so jaded at this point now because of course like DJs still have IDs and new music that they tease and all that. But now when I see someone doing that, I just automatically assume it's the start of a rollout campaign for them.
Right.
It's like, because they're like, you already know what the social media posts are going to look like. You already know what the wording is going to be. I'm just a jaded asshole at this point, but it's not the same. Like I miss those days. I know exactly what you're talking about of just like, you hear something once, you never hear it again. And still, I have those too. There's songs I've heard one time in somebody's set that I think about 10 years later,
Yeah. Or it's an edit or a VIP or something that, Gesaffelstein does that a lot, which I love. A couple sets that I've heard of his that were recorded and, you listen back and he'll rework even some of his OGs into like a new arrangement or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I want that one so bad. And it's like, I'll never get it. But I'm like, that's what makes me appreciate him as an artist so much. I think it's cool. And but it's funny how sometimes those songs can be the ones that I had a song from, way back when there was a huge song of me for a while. It was my song Wah Wah. I never planned to release that song. I made it as like a DJ tool and as like a cool hype song for my sets. And then other DJs started asking for it. I started handing it out. I started giving it. Everybody was playing it, started getting so requested. And then it kind of got to the point where I'm like, all right, I think I might have to release this song, because there was, it had been like a year and a half that I had been playing it and other DJs had been playing it before it even came out. And, so there's in a way that can work to your favor, but that's one of the few times I think that like you have a song like that actually makes its way into release.
Man. The streets demanded it.
The streets demanded it. Yes, exactly.
Oh man. All right. Well, we got to wrap this up, man. I mean, last question, and maybe we can find a way to bring it home on this is, I wrote this down. I don't know why, but what do you think about the idea of legacy? Is it something you think about? Do you think about like how what you put out there is going to be perceived? Do you care what happens after you're gone? Does it cross your mind at all?
I would be lying if I said that it didn't cross my mind, for sure. I think that I think we all as humans, like, one of the things that we all think about, and it has no relation to how religious you are or not, but is our own mortality and what happens in life. And, you look at the people that we learn about in history and what they did to change the world. And it would be incredible to be an artist that moved enough people or became part of history that, that your memory lives on. People are learning about you in years to come. But I don't know if that's my driving focus in life. I think that in a way, if that's your whole focus, it's kind of a little misguided and a little egotistical, and you're not living in the moment. You're living for something else.
Yeah.
But I think that like more so now than ever, I think about that, because I think that for a long time, I was almost like, even when I was starting, even when I was having success, I almost felt like I didn't belong. I wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't have a musical theory background. I didn't go to school for music. I didn't, play in a band necessarily when I was young. What did I deserve to be here? Like, why am I here? Almost like this weird self-doubt. And I've always been really hard on myself in that sense my whole life. And I think that, I'm slowly trying to chip away at that and say, hey, like I deserve, to have my voice heard. And I just kind of self-confidence, I guess, in a way. And yeah, I don't know. I guess in that sense, like, with this new album, like, I don't think this is going to end up being on the Mount Rushmore of all time electronic albums, but I would be so happy if it was. But for me, I think I'm more proud of my accomplishment with myself and getting to this point and making it. And anything in the future, I think will definitely have a little bit more of my legacy in thought. But I got here and have made it this far without necessarily worrying about that. And I think that that's okay. I don't think that I have to be the greatest musician of all time for myself to feel fulfilled, in music. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Oh,
or not,
dude, you're a fucking pro. That was like, that was a perfect button on it. You brought it back to the album. You tied in other shit we were talking about. That was a pro ending.
I think I've spent 95% of this interview talking too much. That's what's supposed
to happen, dude. And actually, let me say this to you too. You said like, I don't know if it'll end up on the Mount Rushmore of albums. But what I think is cool is that I think it's almost absolutely going to end up in someone's Mount Rushmore of albums. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's funny, like that's a great point. And I didn't even think about that until you just said that, sometimes it is like when I look out and I'm like, fuck, like, let's say it's not even a big venue, but I'm like, wow, I just sold 900 tickets in Orlando or whatever it might be. And I'm like, that's 900 people that took time out of their day, which is, first and foremost, the best thing you can give someone is your time, right? Like it's a generating asset for everyone. And it's like, I'm just so grateful. And I think that it's easy to sometimes in all walks of life kind of stop and appreciate things. And I think that at the end of the day, like I'm going to be gone. I don't remember what it was like before I was born. I don't know if I'm going to remember what it's like after I'm gone, but I don't know if, my ego is going to be dead too when I die. So I think for me, if I can make a difference, I've had people come up to me and literally tell me that my music or my song really got them through a hard time. Or I had someone literally say like, I helped them from committing suicide. And I think like I, almost didn't know what to say in the moment because I was, obviously I'm so grateful that they're still here and that means so much. But I'm like, wow, like I would have never thought that this song when I was making it would connect with someone like that. And at the end of the day, like, isn't that just as cool? Even,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like in the end of, in 20 million years, I don't even think the existence of Plato or Socrates is even going to be, it's all going to be dust, who knows?
Yeah,
but,
dude, absolutely.
Or Metallica, but
right. I mean,
maybe
think
not
about
Metallica, they'll probably live on.
Well, yeah, they probably will, but there's only a few. I mean, if you think about even like classical music, it's like we know like the top 5 to 10 composers. There were probably a lot of other composers, it's like it's all going to go away.
Of course. Yeah.
It's all going to go away.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And I think this is the last thing I'll say. I think the idea of legacy, you just made me realize that maybe that's the legacy worth shooting for, is just, being a part of somebody else's life rather than having like the spotlight on it and having every critic agree that this is the best thing that's ever been made. I think the true value is like, no, it's like you get to be a part of somebody else's life and you get to affect it in some way, or you get to be part of some community through your work and your actions. Like, to me, 100%. That's the real legacy, man. Yeah,
100%. And honestly, you never know. I mean, like literally, how many artists and people who were at one point they were nobodies in life. I was just reading about Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Right? It's like he basically died poor.
Yeah.
And Moby Dick became a classic later on, and that that's with a lot of authors, a lot of artists. Basquiat, is an artist who was really big at the time, but his legacy now is way long after he passed, you know? And I think that, so for me, I guess going back to your question, that's not what I think or focus on right now. And I think that maybe the people that do are in it for the wrong reasons,
Yeah. So I agree, man. Fuck yeah. You got me fired up now. That was a good way.
Let's go.
Yeah. Dude, it's great talking to you, man. We gotta, you gotta stay the champ.
Actually, wait, real quick. My legacy is actually going to be being the MVP of this podcast.
Oh, that's right. Of course. Of course.
So I need to be on this more than anyone combined ever. So
I think the only person competing with you is Kurt right now. I think everyone else.
Oh, not that guy. That guy sucks. I got to pump my numbers up.
Yeah, exactly, dude. All right, buddy. Well, I love you, man. It's great talking to you, dude. Thank you for, I know we went over time a little, so thank you for that too.
No, man. Thank you for doing this. Thanks for the podcast. It's always awesome to talk with you. And I love listening to the podcast, and I learn a lot. And I think you have a great way with people and getting them to open up. So keep doing it, man.
Thank you, man. That's the secret, is just going over time until people get tired and forget that we're recording.
I haven't forgotten.
I know.
Let's keep talking about me, Willy.
Yeah. Okay, part 2 starts now.
Yeah, part 2. Yeah. Here we go.
All right, buddy. Have a great rest of your day, man. Hope to see you soon.
Man, you as well. Thanks, man.
All right, man.
Later.
Peace.